We are now moving down to the lower respiratory tract. The trachea is a tube that leads to the lungs. It is made of 16 to 20 C-shaped hyaline cartilage rings that are open to the posterior. These rings face the esophagus, which is appropriate as the lumen of the esophagus expands only when food or water are passing through. The rings being open then have some give that allows for swallowing. The trachealis muscle can tighten and relax to help control how much air flows in and out of our lungs. Obviously, it is important to make sure that particles that don't belong or would be harmful to the lungs do not pass through the trachea. The respiratory tract is made of pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium. This tissue type is especially useful for trapping debris. The mucociliary escalator is a mechanism by which pathogens and particles are trapped in the mucus, which is then pushed upward towards the pharynx so it can be swallowed into the stomach instead of breathed into the lungs. Studying both of the illustrations on the slide should be helpful to understand this process. Okay, we are moving down that respiratory tract. But first, I want to point out the two structures at the superior end of the trachea. They are the thyroid and cricoid cartilages. Both are made of hyaline cartilage, and you'll see them in lab. The cricoid is the only cartilage that forms a full circle. It is not C-shaped. The thyroid cartilage is shaped like a shield. The images side by side here are interesting because to the right, you can see what is visualized on an X-ray. Quite a lot. The trachea comes to a point where it branches, called the carina. The branching gives the left and the right primary bronchi. You will see in lab that the right lung is formed by 3 lobes, whereas the left lung has 2. Therefore, the right primary bronchus splits into 3 secondary bronchi, 1 for each lobe, and then the left primary bronchus splits into 2. The next branching is into the tertiary or third branching. Each secondary bronchus will split into these. Please note that these structures are all still a part of the conducting division or zone. Now we are looking at the lungs. As already mentioned, there are 3 lobes on the right and 2 on the left, due to the position of the heart being more on the left side of the body. You can even see the cardiac notch right here carved out just for the heart to fit. The lungs, like the heart, have an apex and a base. In this case, the apex is the superior region and the base is inferior. Now we are in the lungs, where the conducting zone ends and the respiratory zone begins. The tertiary bronchi branch into bronchioles. Terminal bronchioles join with respiratory bronchioles. It is in the respiratory bronchioles that the respiratory division begins. Here you see the terminal bronchioles as it branches. It is from the respiratory bronchiole that we see the alveolar ducts, they're not labeled, the alveolar sacs, and finally the alveoli. There are 2 types of alveolar cells, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 cells are flat, squamous, and form the structures of the alveoli. Their function is gas exchange. The respiratory membrane is also known as the air-blood barrier as it separates the inside of the alveoli from the inside of the respiratory blood capillary. The respiratory membrane is essential to maintain the basic structure and unique microenvironment needed in the lungs. Type 2 alveolar cells produce a very important substance called surfactant, which is needed to reduce the surface tension of the fluid in the lungs and ultimately ensure that the alveoli don't collapse. Individuals who have cystic fibrosis produce an abnormal amount of mucus and have impaired surfactant function, which is a reason that the small airways can collapse in these individuals. Lastly, there are the alveolar macrophages, which are also called dust cells. They provide immune support and protection by destroying respiratory pathogens. This is a nice illustration of the alveolus, a singular form of alveoli. So this is single. Lastly, there's the pleura. Let's look at the visceral and parietal pleura. The visceral pleura is in contact with the lung tissue, and the parietal pleura is more superficial and attaches to the thoracic wall. Between the two is where the pleural cavity lies. There's a small amount of fluid between, found here, that functions as a lubricant to reduce friction between the two pleural layers that may develop during breathing. The presence of the pleural fluid prevents the lungs from collapsing and is also necessary for inhalation.